Well, here it is in all of its 1080p glory. The Dell XPS P120 desktop computer that was built in November of 1995. I showed this computer briefly a few months ago in a video that I did when I was given this machine along with boxes and boxes and boxes of software and two 512K Macs. Well, the Macs are long sold off now, and I had no real use for them other than having something different to play with, but I did keep some of the paperwork in one of the games though. The XPS line was the high-performance breed of Dell machines, typically installed with more RAM and cache, faster graphics card, higher quality sound card, more options for larger hard drives and things like that. And in the 90s, I believe it was just standard equipment for these things to come with a CD-ROM, which even back then was not necessarily standard equipment on every computer. Obviously, these machines could be specifically configured by the customer, and usually certain configurations were and still are only available on certain models. Dell does still do customizations on their website, but you will pay through the ass for the upgrades. Far more than you typically will pay from Newegg, as an example. The new XPS line of Dells these days is typically a higher performance line, but the build quality is severely lacking nowadays. And then again, all of the OEM laptops and desktops nowadays are pretty much just cut and paste machines, with the cheapness and layout of everything being pretty much the same, except for maybe a change in the faceplate or, putting a different name on the cover. This XPS P120 was given to me as a completely original computer, and as far as I can tell, this machine was never opened after it was assembled by Dell nearly 20 years ago. This is the most complete system I've ever come across. Well, most complete other than the two 512K Macs, of course, and by complete I mean paperwork and monitor and keyboard and mouse and all that fun stuff that's kind of fun to look through and have on these vintage computers, just to kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of neat to have that stuff, I think. Speaking of the original software and manuals, I do have all that. Even the original build sheets and the receipt from Best Buy when this guy bought this computer. Hell, there's even a Dell sales magazine inside of the box still. But we'll have a close look at the software a little bit later in this video. And there's some interesting things. The build sheet is kind of interesting to look at. And the sales receipt's also interesting too. There's something kind of interesting going on with that sales receipt. And it's kind of a bit of a head scratcher, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm the second owner of this Dell XPS system, and I don't believe that anyone else has violated the sanctity of this case since it left Dell's factory some 20 years ago. Had a slight bit of trepidation violating the sanctity of this machine, but I figured why the hell not? I have to open this and have a look inside of it. That's the part of the fun of all this stuff. Thankfully, there was no quality assurance or warranty void sticker to violate upon removing of the top case there. So, taking a look at the top cover shows more of the galvanized sheet metal used in this case. Even back then, Dell stamped the cases during assembly. This stamp indicates that this machine was assembled right before the sales date on the receipt. Strange thing is, though, the receipt tells three different stories about that. Once the cover is removed, the case is a bit flimsy, which kind of surprised me. Take a look at this. I'll just lift this corner up of it and you can see how much flex there is in that case. It feels like a fairly sturdy case till you lift the corner of it, that is. The date of manufacturing stamped on the Caviar 31600 1.6 gigabyte hard drive shows that the hard drive was pretty much fresh from manufacturing when it was installed in the system. Obviously, Dell did not let these drives sit around too long and used them pretty much as soon as they arrived. CD-ROM indicates it was about 3 months older, however. The motherboard is an interesting layout. It is basically a baby AT form factor, except that it uses what appears to be an ATX style power plug with many of the same color of wires that a standard ATX power supply would have. Though, I doubt that this is a true ATX power supply. Removing the hard drive tray reveals that this is a Dell power supply. And take notice of that old Dell logo there with a slightly elongated E. The 230 watt power supply in this computer does appear to be an ATX power supply with a standard 20 pin ATX plug and header, but the sticker on the side only lists the voltages that would normally be stated on an AT power supply. I haven't checked to see if the pinout is indeed standard ATX or not, or if it's some kind of a custom-made hybrid that Dell came out with before ATX was standardized. The power button is going to the motherboard like a normal ATX style would, and the connector to the motherboard is about an inch or so away from the ATX header. Right smack dab next to a fan header, by the way. Gee, I wonder how many of these power buttons found themselves plugged into the fan header instead, Dell. The date code on the power supply is 9528, which I'm guessing means week 28 of 1995, or about right in the smack dab middle of July of 1995. The motherboard, proudly bearing the Dell logo, is using the Intel 430FX/66 chipset, known for being a fairly good Socket 5 chipset. Many OEM computer manufacturers used Intel OEM boards back in the day, and Dell, Gateway, IBM, heck, even E-Machines, just to name a few. This is sort of an easy thing to spot too, as they all pretty much look identical, with many of the same style of barcodes and serial numbers stickered to them. Not to mention the color of the PCB and the style of the text and stuff like that. And Intel no longer manufactures their own motherboards anymore. They have turned that over to Foxconn. Surprise, surprise. The 430FX chipset was Intel's first chipset for the Socket 5, which was also known as Triton. This chipset introduced a faster memory controller capable of utilizing the then newly released EDO RAM, and it also introduced bus mastering to the IDE controller. This chipset was capable of handling 128 megabytes of RAM, however it had a flaw in its caching, in that it was not able to cache above 64 megabytes, and this was a flaw that carried over to the Triton 3 as well, which was also known as the 430VX chipset. Still though, 64 megabytes was just about at the end of the world when the 430FX chipset was introduced. Although this was still a good all-around chipset and a good performer, it was a bit out of date by the time this computer was built, as the slightly faster 430HX chipset had already been out, but that also carried with it a higher price tag. Still though, at 120 MHz clock, I doubt there would really be any performance difference between the FX and the HX chipset, but obviously higher clock speed, that might change a little bit. 4 PCI 2.0 slots and 4 ISA slots, about the normal amount of expansion slots for any motherboard of this era. 32 megabytes of matched EDO RAM is currently installed in this machine. The memory I ordered claimed to be new old stock 32 megabyte per stick EDO RAM, but this was not the case, as these are 8 meg per stick. Thank you, eBay seller. But it turned out to be exactly the same as what was in the system that shipped with the system, so I can't complain too much. I doubled the RAM with the exact same memory chips, which is a hard thing to do. It's hard to come across exact same memory chips that you've already got laying around unless you happen to have bought a large supply of those same memory chips back in the day. The graphics card is made by Number 9. I always wanted a Number 9 card, and I really couldn't say why. I just loved the name. It sounded cool, Number 9 graphics. And hey, it was even made in the USA. This card is 2 megabytes of RAM and sports a S3 Trio 64 graphics chip, though this chip is 2D only. This system would be a good place for a Voodoo or a Voodoo 2 to live in, as the S3 Trio 64 has no 3D acceleration of any sort. But for now, I like it how it is, and if I want to run a 3D accelerated game, well, I've got plenty of other machines to do that. The US Robotics 288 ISA modem here. Yep, it's definitely a modem, and there's really nothing special about that other than the fact that it's a USR branded modem. And they were pretty well built back in the day. USR was pretty well regarded as being pretty top the end line for models of modems back then. And this is when modems were built with RAM and processors on board, and they didn't depend on the CPU for their dirty work. Damn crappy Win modems. The real treasure inside of this case is actually, in my opinion, the sound card. Just take a look at the size of this sucker. That is a real big Sound Blaster Auth32 card with onboard CD-ROM and IDE interface. It is a Sound Blaster Auth32 value card, but hell, it's a heck of a value. I mean, look at the size of this thing. I do like the looks of this case, and one thing that I think changes the experience of vintage computing is using a CF card adapter in place of the hard drive. You know, part of the experience is to hear that hard drive working and that vintage clicky clacky sound of the hard drive. And some hard drives sound like popping corn as they read the data on the drive. This computer has aged extremely well over the years. Only the monitor shows signs of discoloration, which according to the back of the monitor says it was manufactured in September of 1995. The buttons behind the front cover are a bit broken though. One fell into the monitor when I tried to adjust some of the settings. I'll have to fix that one of these days, but you know, it's not bothering me too much as I don't have to play with that button. I can stick something in there to push the button if I need to adjust it. CRT monitors were damn expensive back in the day. Even a 15-inch like this one was several $100s. It would be nice if this was a true flat screen, but it is anti-static and has mostly digital control, so it really wasn't that bad of a monitor back then. Pretty well advanced for CRT monitors. So now we've got everything put back together here. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this system performs. First, we'll take a look at the top bench scores here. I have used this benchmark over the years off and on, and I do have some issues with it as the overall score is vastly affected by the video cards installed. I tend to believe it's testing the video card based on how fast the program can communicate with the RAM of the video card, and PCI video cards seem to test a bit lower than VLV cards do. This system score is pretty close to my QSI Legend motherboard with the Pentium 75 installed overclocked to 83 MHz. While this system is slightly ahead, it's not ahead by much, and this Dell seems to be a pretty average performing machine, at least according to the top bench scores anyway. So let's see what old SpeedSys has to say on the subject. This is a benchmark I've been running for a while now. I love all the pretty graphs it draws. Anyway, this system is scoring about 89 points on the bar there, pretty close to the Pentium 133 as what would be expected, since this is only running 13 MHz less. The memory bandwidth is showing roughly 200 megabytes a second, and you can see that the L1 cache is scoring about 227 megabytes. The L2 cache is only about 95 megabytes a second. Memory throughput is scoring at only about 65 megabytes a second, pretty low there. You can see how fast the memory throughput drops off there in the reading, writing, and moving cycles there. But again, this is a pretty average score for this type of system. Nothing too remarkably special about it. Booted into Windows, which seems like the factory original load of Windows 95 to me, reveals a similar story with Quake 2. With no 3D acceleration from the video card, Quake 2 is running in pure software mode. In this test, I chose to run it with sound on, as this is how I think most of us would be playing these games. These two demo benchmarks ran, this system averaged about 13 frames a second from what I can tell. Again, pretty typical performer for this kind of hardware configuration. It might do a bit better if I had 64 meg of RAM installed, as the scores get knocked down a bit when the game has to pull bits of data here and there from the hard drive when it's running the benchmark. But even 13 frames a second is still quite playable. I certainly would want to be in a multiplayer deathmatch though with this system, let me tell you what. The sound quality of this card and these Altec Lansing speakers is pretty dang good. I I do think the MIDI capabilities are a bit lacking though. Yeah, the MIDI is okay. I think the AUX64 value sounded quite a bit better though. Still like this card though. I like them big. Yeah, at least in the computer components, that is, you perverts. Overall, I really like this system. It has been a solid machine and never given me any issues at all. Many hours have been spent playing Diablo on this machine, and playing Quake 2 is how I remember playing it back in the day when I had my K5 133 rocking an S3 Verge video card from Diamond Stealth 3D 2000, as a matter of fact. Well, I guess there's only one thing left to show in this video. The boxed time capsule containing all the original software and manuals and even the receipt. Sealed and unopened, this is the original driver and software discs for the AUX32 value card. Next is a sealed and unopened envelope of Dell manuals and documentation. And I have absolutely no intention of opening this either. Well, I am covering up the owner's name and address on this sheet here, but we can see that he paid for a 1-year service contract for this computer. The original copy of Windows 95 is in here. There's actually 2 discs in this box for whatever reason. There might be an explanation of that looking at the receipts a little bit later here. Check out this old Dell sales magazine. The most powerful Windows 95 system $26.99 can buy. Well, maybe unless you built it yourself. Still interesting though to look at this old magazine, at the ads and the prices Dell sold their upgrades, accessories, and software for back in the day. Looking at their prices for a Sound Blaster kit with a CD-ROM drive. Holy crap! And don't forget about the cost of those CRT monitors back then either. Wow, look at that 21-inch monitor for the bargain price of $2,299. And now we get to the interesting part of the system. Here are all the original receipts when this computer was purchased and ordered through Best Buy. $3,000 for this computer is what he paid. Imagine going to your local Best Buy or other giant retailer that sells computers and paying this amount for any computer today. The receipt is rather interesting as it shows a refund was given on this machine. Then it appears that things were added to another receipt. There's also mention of a floor model. I don't really know what was going on with this thing, but it left me with my head scratching a bit there. I'm guessing that he may have purchased a floor model, then he either had problems or he changed his mind and ordered a new one. Either way, it looks to me like he bought a system, took it back and returned it and got another one, and this one was ordered and shipped from Dell directly to his home, from what I can tell anyway. Here is the original build sheet for this computer from Dell. This is how I know that the system has never been altered since it was built, as everything inside of the system matches this build sheet. I doubt this system was ever opened until I got it and violated its sanctity. And the following footage is more pamphlets and software that was in the box. Lastly, we get to the getting started with your Dell sheet. A very large sheet that tells you everything you need to know about where things are and what to plug where into. Remember when computers and even printers came with this? I know it seems like a silly thing to include nowadays, but there are a lot of stupid people out there that would really benefit from a sheet like this being included with their computer. You'd be surprised how many people have absolutely no clue what plug to plug the monitor in and what plug to plug the power cord in and which one is which. I have to deal with them on a daily basis, so I know this for a fact very well. Well, I think this is a pretty sweet little system, and this was definitely an interesting system to explore. I really like all that paperwork that came with it too. That makes it pretty interesting. The software is what's killer about that. Take a look at this. Here's just what's inside one of these boxes he gave me. A bunch of games down in here too. There's even some PC Gamer discs in here. That's pretty sweet. These things are like vintage new too. Maximum CD, I used to buy those too. Delta Force 2. And here's another box. Get that out of the way. This one's actually to a Dell that he never bothered to give me. An 8250, that would be a Pentium 4 with RD RAM. And I really wish he'd given me that because I would have loved to have that. But as it sits, I only had the monitor and the subwoofer that he got with that system. Look at all these games that were in there, or are in there I should say. Including some of the boxes too, as I just dropped all those. There's even more down in here. Books and manuals and Rome Total War. Command and Conquer Generals. Office. Upgrade to Windows Vista. Prince of Persia. Heroes of Might and Magic. All these games in here. Doesn't seem to be anything in that box. Here's even more that were in a box. Boxes of games. Oh, the CDs aren't in most of these, but there are CDs in a couple of them. That Wing Commander 3, the CD's in that one, I know that. I gotta put these on a shelf or something. These are awesome. Well, there's even more in this box, and apparently this software was bought when he bought the XPS 120. Steel Panthers. Steel Panthers, he liked war games. Heroes of Might and Magic, look at all these. Gettysburg. Myst. I have the other Myst game. The Riven, whatever it's called. 2 that goes with that. And books. Windows 95 for Dummies. Or what is this? No, that's not an idiot's guide. Visual learning guides. Wow. And I do have the Canon printer that he bought with this computer. It's at work. I have no use for a Canon printer. It's just an old bubble jet. Office bookshelf. Office professional and bookshelf. Oh, there's some more down here too. Dragonfall. Mind games. And the CDs in that one. As far as I can tell, the CDs in pretty much all of these. Canon Creative CD-ROM. Okay. I think this guy must have gone to the game store every week and bought a game, because I don't know how else you'd get a whole computer store full of, or game store full of games in 3 or 4 boxes unless you went there once a week and bought them. I don't know. But what I do know is that there is a heck of a lot of money spent on games. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of money he spent on games. You figure those games are probably about 40 or 50 bucks a piece? Yeah, that's a lot of money spent on games. Well, this was a nice video to sit down and make. It's nice to be able to get a computer that's so complete like this, that has the history with it, and the software, and the manuals, and all that stuff. It's pretty cool to get that. You don't usually find that with computers. You might find them with the software disks, but finding them with the manuals and the original receipts and some of the history that goes with that, like the Dell Wear magazine, I think it was, that's pretty cool to look through. Man, $400 for a CD-ROM sound card set. My God. Now, granted, Dell does tend to mark stuff up quite a bit higher than what you would find in back then Computer Shopper. I wish I had one of those Computer Shopper books, magazines. I'd like to find one again. But anyway, yeah, this was a nice, fun video to make. I really like the fact that this system is immaculate condition, except for the monitor. The buttons were broke, and I just kind of aided in that one kind of going back into the monitor a little bit further than it should when I tried to adjust some of the settings on it there. But a little bit of glue would fix that if I cared to fix it, but I can just stick something in there to push the little button itself and the little micro switch inside of there, so no big deal. But yeah, it was pretty cool to have a complete system like this with the history and the software and everything else. And the games are quite nice to have. It's kind of interesting to see that this guy bought the 512K Max and then 10 years later or so bought a Dell. And then about 7 years after that bought a Dimension 8250. I guess he liked Windows enough to stick with it over the Mac. But he's definitely a heavy gamer. I don't know how else you'd get that many games without going to the game store in the mall or something like that every week and buying 4 or 5 games at a time. I don't know how you do that, but he had a lot of money apparently, so that's cool. A lot of those games you can't find anymore unless you look really hard on eBay and pay through the nose for them. Well, I hope you guys like this, and we'll see you next time right here on the Wayback Tech channel. Peace out, everyone.
Yeah.